Applications of the members of the commission, the staff of the commission, and any consultant used are on file with the town and are hereby made part of each and every application heard tonight. The guidelines and procedures adopted by the commission are also made part of each and every application. Each application heard tonight is considered on its own merits and is not to be considered as establishing a precedent for any other application. The Historic District Design Guidelines have been adopted by the town of Sykesville in accordance with Article 6B 8.06A of the Maryland Code and follow the recommendations of the United States Secretary of the Interior. The Sykesville Historic District Commission follows Robert's Rules of Order with the exception that the chairperson votes. Okay, we have the agenda up on the screen, and the first agenda item on this evening is 2023-11. Liquor Board compliant barrier for outdoor seating at 7556 Main Street.
He is not in attendance tonight, or right now.
Okay, so we'll just postpone that one.
You can postpone it, or you can discuss it if you think there's enough in his application to discuss.
I mean, we've approved this before in the past. Do we want to discuss it?
We've set the precedent already for
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So, I guess,
Locomotion is pretty much set.
yeah.
My only question was, is the sidewalk the same width where he is as far as for the other person?
The setback.
So
Looks
he gave a 5-foot clearance on the sidewalk in his depiction of it.
It seems wider, or appears wider.
And do we know anything about what the linkage is going to be?
Yeah,
with this?
materials.
He said rope. I don't know about the stanchions. Excellent word. But I think you could do similar to how you did with locomotive and approve contingent on them not being plastic.
It'd be nice to see what the stanchions are prior to the.
Okay.
So maybe we can just make a ruling that we'd like to see the materials being utilized. If he circulates that information, I think we can then approve it. Okay. Any other discussion points? Is there a motion?
I'll go ahead. Do you have a question?
No.
Okay. I'll go ahead and approve it with further clarification on his stanchions and the type of material he's using to connect the stanchions.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, second item on our agenda this evening is discussion of the draft guidelines. Can you bring them up, Carrie? So we've all had an opportunity to discuss our comments on this, and I think they've been integrated, correct, into the revisions that are seen on the screen now? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you guys have any comments on those revisions or anything that we had sent over?
Yeah, we'll just, it's a
Yeah.
process over time.
Sure.
Development process, and it changes, and you respond, and it changes again, so it's pretty much fully formed now, and, we're looking for the parts of the sections that maybe aren't quite hitting the points that you wanna hit in the right words. So based on your experience here with the town, we took what you had in your previous guidelines and incorporated all those, but expanded in some areas. So, Lana, would you like to,
Yeah.
what are we looking for?
Well, I think, in terms of comparison of the old versus this revision, oftentimes before it was written very much in terms of contributing, non-contributing, street-facing, rear, not from public right-of-way. So we tried to, in a lot of the kind of the heavier sections of walls or windows or roofs. We really tried to make that very clear. Well, you know, in terms of number one, we don't have the 4 categories anymore in terms of the map. We just have contributing and non-contributing. So it's a very clear understanding of where to go about it. And then within each of these major sections, which again, there was not a real outline on the first, on what you had before, but now you have a real outline with describing the building the way oftentimes the preservation standards do, starting from the roof, walls, windows, and so it really breaks it down simply in terms of the building, and then within each section, is it a contributing structure? These are the fundamental things, or is it not? And then discussing materials, and then in terms of the newer, so the sustainability and any of these newer alternate materials, we have in each section, they are introduced, but they really get more defined in their own section, where you have the opportunity to either include more as materials become more available or technologies change, but it's a clear point. So it's much easier, we think anyway, it's much easier to navigate or, you know, go to the glossary in the end and really, you know, find exactly what you're looking for. And then a lot of the diagrams and pictures, we implemented new images that we took and some drawn diagrams that we have to really illustrate and you know, sort of have that good relationship between the text and the form and kind of the illustrations, so.
I think, if I may, I think we're thinking here, because Gary, they haven't been sent these comments yet, correct?
Okay, I didn't know if you had or
Yeah,
not.
so not yet, so we were thinking that if you guys had wanted to hit on some of the major, I guess, points and comments that you had in here,
Oh, did you combine all of our comments together into a single
Yes.
file? Okay.
and then.
That
you
was
know,
what I sent.
That way we can discuss them a little bit now and then.
Oh, okay.
Shoot the.
I
shoot
was under the
document.
assumption they already got the comments. That's good. Okay. So I think when you're talking about contributing and non-contributing buildings, the first thing that dawned on me is the map that you have provided, and this probably isn't your fault, but a lot of the buildings indicated on that map I found are not contributing, that are labeled as contributing. And so
Okay.
I think we should really go through at some point and like fine tune. For
Okay.
instance, 7314, if you scroll to the top, it's the back building. Mike, it's the building to your right, the modular home in the back.
Mhm.
They're listing that as a contributing building. So 7314, which is right there,
Okay.
that's for instance, is a modular new building that's in the back,
Mhm.
and it's listed as contributing.
Okay.
And I think we need to go through this map and make sure it's correct.
Okay.
And then, this isn't for you either, but I was wondering, you know, is there a way that if we have a digital copy of this file, that we can have a picture or something hyperlinked to each of these buildings? So that when we are in a meeting and we need to bring up a reference of a building, we can click on one of these buildings as a reference. That would be
Mhm.
very nice to have.
We
Okay.
can definitely do that with the, and I know Kevin and I have talked about doing present day photos of each of the historic buildings. We can definitely do it with the list that we have. I'm not sure how it'll work out with the map, but we're down to try.
Yeah, either one would be great.
Yeah.
But you could just reference it like 73.4 or 73.12 or whatever, and we could just look down to the list, find 73.12 and click on it.
Yep.
Does everybody agree that would be a good reference?
Yes.
Okay, do you wanna go to the top and we can start talking about any of the comments? I don't know how long this will take, but I guess we can each touch on any of the comments that we added if you wanted to. Obviously, there's some grammatical spelling stuff that was wrong, but that's nothing major.
All spellings. First one is color is subjective.
Yeah. And what was the context of that?
Sorry. Deteriorated historic features will be repaired. When the severity of deterioration requires replacement, the new feature will match the old in design, color, texture, and where possible, materials.
Yeah, so I don't know where we list that in the guidelines somewhere, but we need to have something that said that color is subjective, that we don't have a historic palette approved. And so we have talked about in the past of like maybe incorporating the Benjamin Moore or something, the historic palette, as a reference, as an idea for people, but to force them to say you need to use Benjamin Moore or you need to use Sherman Williams, I don't think is appropriate. But it would be nice to have something to say that color is subjective, and we have maybe available color charts for a reference or something of that nature, somewhere put in the documentation.
And there are palettes out there, historic color palettes, not necessarily naming any specific colors, but
Yeah,
gives you a range of
Yeah.
the period,
sure.
what you'd find.
We just want to have something to hand to somebody who's new to the area and say, here's some suggestions or some things like that.
We're just making some
Yeah.
general comments. So one of the general comments, and I thought I had noted it in here, but maybe I just had it up here and it never made it to the paper. So there's some references to the national registry and national guidelines. Is it worthwhile, and this is really for all of us, is it worthwhile for us to, to try to, do any differentiation? Because I know when I first came to town, I spent a lot of time digging into, the more, national registry type items. And for me, it was most beneficial to focus directly in on the historic guidelines here because they're very different. And so is there a way to kind of maybe not, because I think in here the language kind of points there, right?
That's the nationwide, that's the.
Is that the standard for historic towns then?
Right.
So they point
It is,
to,
but we can certainly I think maybe in this document, it sort of is throughout, maybe it can just be at the beginning, kind of as how did these get developed and
let me be
implemented?
specific.
Yeah.
So when I moved in, the town and the guidelines are concerned with the exterior of the house. That's not the case when you're in, very strict historic districts. And so it would have been useful for me to just know that right out of the chute. So again, that's perhaps a question for the team here more so than you guys, but that's just one example of maybe me going off in a direction that I really didn't necessarily need to.
So, if you're in a historic district and there's local, state, and federal guidelines, and if you're local, you guys make the choices, the approvals, the non-approvals. If you go to the state, MHT cares about the inside and the outside. So if you wanna get the state tax credits, then you've gotta, do it to their level. And if you go national for commercial projects, which I think Main Street could have a few of those, where you get 3 levels of tax credit, 20% each level, you got 60% coming back, then you have to follow National Park Services.
And so that's a whole nother category for the building owner or the residential owner is, okay, so how do I take advantage in an efficient way of understanding where I might be able to recover some of the expense?
Right.
That's a beautiful thing, because that's another piece of it. But just walking in, for just folks like myself, it's a little bit, you can find yourself going in a lot of different directions. I had to spend time talking to the good folks here, for the most part, getting their guidance. I mean, Richard and I first talked when I first moved in. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is there a way to more simplify, sort of this is what you are to do in the town of Sykesville.
Maybe we should have a white page that is something separate that could be had in the office, so if anybody came down that requested information about the different levels of historic district, you can hand them that white page and says, here's the breakdown of if you have a house, if you have a commercial building, what tax credits you're going for. I don't think, these aren't available for public review, are they, the historic district guidelines?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think, I don't know.
So there is some this document has at the beginning something about the whole development of them and then when, things can be applicable to tax credits. So there's something at the beginning. With what you're saying, that I have seen in other guidelines where they have, it's essentially like a flow chart. And you sort of like, okay, what do you start with? Commercial, residential? Are you doing just exterior work? Are you doing exterior and interior? Is it more than $5,000 and you want to some tax credits? So you sort of, you can kind of see this flow chart. So I think that could fit if that's useful in, at the beginning, kind of.
I would have found that very useful.
Yeah.
It probably burned a lot less of the
Yeah.
townspeople's times.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can
Include something,
include
yeah.
something like that.
Okay, Carrie, what's the next comment, major comment?
Does the HDC have purview over the change of zoning requests? And Kevin, that might be more of an internal question for us.
Could you read that again?
I'm sorry. Does the HDC have purview over change of zoning requests?
So, no, would be the short answer. So, when speaking of zoning, generally, everything within the historic district is, like, there's some residential, there's some commercial. So the historic district's basically an overlay property. So when you're talking about any sort of development, you have to follow the zoning regulations of whatever zone you're in. And then you also have to follow the historic guidelines when you're making any alteration to the building. But the zoning more so talks about setbacks and what the building's used for and where it's being placed and not necessarily what it looks like. So they sort of work together there. But the HGC would not have any say if someone were to apply for a zoning change within the historic district. Because the same guidelines would apply to them regardless of what the property was zoned as.
So we could remove that portion. Next one is for procedures for reviewing projects. Can we have these broken into categories with specific requirements under each? Like new construction, renovation, and maintenance, define major additions, or just call it additions. For demolition, distinguish between inside and outside. And do we want a scale drawing or just dimensions?
Yeah, so I guess I got a little verbose with that area. So again, just because I've gone through this recently, I would, in reading through this, I would have found it helpful if it was kind of very, if we could find a way to categorize a little bit more the different actions that you are to take on your home, right? So if you're doing restoration, if you're doing full replacements, if there's a way to kind of break those down into categories, because it's done in the document, it's just, for me, it just wasn't really easy to get to. But there are guidelines that tell us exactly, the things that you can do, and then the things that you're suggested perhaps to do or not to do. So categorizing them in some way with the associated checklists, I would have found helpful.
You just we'll send you this
For
document,
sure.
has these comments in it.
Yeah.
After the meeting, so you'll be able to go back and reference each document.
For demolition submission requirements, it seems oddly vague given the specificity of all other items.
Yeah, so Carrie, I threw that one in there.
Okay.
I know the general premise there would be that you need to talk to everyone before you even get underway with anything. But it seems like there could probably be some further clarification of things that would disqualify demolition, maybe. Like some prohibitions so that people don't have to spend their time going down that rabbit hole if there's a definite no there. It kind of alludes to the same thing Mike's been talking about, where the clearer things can be here, the less people have to go chasing things around. I know I've done the same. I've shown up in Richard's driveway, asking questions, so.
We need to get Richard a sign, it sounds like.
And
He's got a sign just for.
we've
different
had
business.
people come here multiple times and try to present on stuff that isn't privy to our guidelines. It's just, can I paint my door red, or can I do,
Yeah,
and so they pay the permit fee and all this stuff, for the application fee, and they come down, and you're like, well, you really didn't need to come down here and waste a half an hour or whatever amount of time. So a little bit more information, and like, as Mike is saying, like, what is approved, what isn't approved.
No, okay, maybe that's something that we can also start helping with when
Yeah.
someone calls about submitting an application.
For sure, so if it's just like paint the door red, staff will tell them for that, but a lot of times it's part of like a bigger application for, like Mike in his house, for example, he's doing all the work. You might include things in there that aren't necessarily under the purview of the Historic Commission, but because it's in the grand scheme of the whole application, it gets sent in together.
Yeah, if we could just
So if
have a
we could
little
clear
bit
that
more
up, maybe
concise
it's-
list,
yeah.
so Mike as a homeowner, or somebody else can say, well, I'll just take this off the list, I don't really need to include this.
Mhm.
Okay.
Next one is for the different tax credits. If we are going to identify available credits, we offer specific useful information that identifies property types and locations that can qualify.
This is similar to what we already.
Similar,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think I had
That
sort
would
of.
work with
I-
the,
I touched on that a
Mhm,
little bit
the flow
earlier, so
chart.
if you guys were able to capture that, I think,
Just as an add-on to that, do we have the ability to be upfront with people about when this kind of tax credit possibility is real and when it's not?
from a local standpoint, yes. State and federal, I don't really know too much about those different tax credits, so I don't know if that's really our place to be telling them whether or not they would be able to get it.
yeah, I can say I'm in the middle of it right now, and it's very different from like the guidelines that the HDC goes by. I mean, they require a lot more documentation than we do,
Sure.
down to taking out things to just to essentially do exploratory on removal or replacement. So it's, I don't know, it's a lot more comprehensive. I think we'd all have to do a lot of research to give some guidance, but it's a little different.
It might be easier to just say, okay, contact the Maryland Historic Trust for info on state
Yeah.
tax credits and things like that, instead of us trying to know everything about a process that isn't ours.
Right.
In terms of application though, if they were to apply for tax credits, at a local level, does your application reflect the MHT application? Or will it in the future?
In the future, yes. At the moment, I don't think we have an actual tax credit process at the local level, although it is written into our town code that we have a tax
Okay.
credit availability. We've just, in the 7 years I've been here, we've never had it used.
Okay. Because I think like with, for example, Baltimore County, the forms are almost identical. The amount of photographs and information can be less. The good thing is once you send them to the state, they worry about satisfying the state, and the county, most of the time, just approves it without a full review, and because it's already gone through a lot of that process. So it helps the homeowner and it helps the commission having a sort of a parallel process, with the understanding that there is more involved at a state level and lesser concern at a local level.
Do they go through the two processes simultaneously, or is it like the local level
They
first and then
can.
the state?
They can, most of the time, because of the time
Mhm.
frame, they go through state first, and then they get an automatic. They don't have to wait to be on your agenda,
Mhm.
because
It's just like a check mark almost, they've been
Yeah,
approved by the
it's
state.
like, what is it called? I'm trying to think of
It comes at the end of the agenda, it's
Mhm.
approved by
Right.
the
your
staff.
staff. or-
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, so staff reviews it, and staff will only raise a question to the commission if they see something, but
Mhm.
the whole commission does not have to vote on it and review it.
Gotcha, well, that might be easier for us, cause it'll go, the tax credits would be for the bigger projects, not necessarily the small ones, so. It's definitely something we'll look into with, after all of the guideline stuff, we'll definitely update our application.
I think, was I hearing you correctly also though, Richard, which is, yeah, can we be a little bit more straightforward with the local credits? Or did I hear that right?
No, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
instead of,
I mean,
Okay.
I've made a couple of inquiries over the years, and basically, response I got was, oh, well, it's on paper, but we don't have any money.
okay.
Oh,
So,
yeah, I don't know if there's anything in our budget, or, I'm sure we have a line item, but I don't know if there's any funding towards it, so that'll definitely be something, as we get more into this process, and we understand more about how our tax credits can work, and we can open them up to more people, we can definitely start funding it more.
Yes, I think then there has to be language in this where it says that it's on paper, that it's on in as first come, first served, whatever that means. And I
Right.
mean, like even the state, I think now they finally were able to allow more in the budget, but
Right,
some will not expire, but the budget for last year, for example, ran out.
Right, it was a yearly appropriation, now it's a
Well,
right.
3-year.
why I track with what Richard's talking about is because I've heard anecdotally about people, receiving a credit for different things like their front door. And I'm like, oh, okay, that would be nice if that existed somewhere where I could go and say, these are the things that can qualify for,
Mhm.
a few
Yeah.
bucks.
Yeah, we'll certainly look into the town process for that.
Can we be made privy of that, like, whatever the pot is and kept
For
up
sure.
to date on it with the council? So like,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be to the public, but it could be internally so we know that there's funds available. And we're not speaking out of turn when we say there is something available.
Yeah, I think we'll get through this guidelines process, we'll update our application, and then right around then is when we're gonna start talking about the next fiscal year budget.
Okay.
Cause our budget runs July 1 to June 30, so we just started the new one. But once we get into that process, we can definitely bring it up, and Joe can come to a meeting and discuss. It's all public business, so
Okay.
it's definitely open to the public.
Good.
We can get some funding in there and
Okay.
help out some citizens.
What's next?
Grammatical ones. So for the text box here, it's side elevation and features of non-contributing in the public right-of-way. Should it be visible from a public right-of-way? And then, I guess going off of that, from previous questions that we've had here, are these historic public rights of way, or all public rights of way?
From what you had before,
Mhm.
it wasn't clear.
Right.
I think the assumption is current public rights, right away.
And then is
but
there,
any right of way rather than the right of way in a historic district.
So an example being, there's a couple houses that have a street running in front of and behind them.
yeah,
So
Yes.
you can see the whole house in the
Right.
Yes.
right of way if it's that, but I think only Springfield, right, is
Right.
in there.
Or like
for
this
some
building where we
houses.
have Main Street at the front and Townhouse Drive coming up the backside of it. something like that, where it's seen basically from all sides.
And this is a real issue because we just dealt with that not too long ago, where a house, the proposal was to put some material on the three sides of the house that faced Springfield, but there was a road right behind. And the question was, do you require the same material across the back of the house?
And just for clarification, you're saying the road behind it was not in the historic district?
Right.
Technically, no.
Okay,
But it is a
so
public
the
right of
right-of-way
way.
was outside the historic district,
Mhm.
but the house was in, so if you can view that elevation.
Well, as we understand the map is not delineating, it's not very, at least it's not, we haven't established the accuracy of the public the right of way. It's more about the houses and the buildings. So I think that makes, in our case, anyway, with the way we've seen it was always about the built elements. So if it's a non-contributing or a contributing and it is visible from the back, that takes precedence regardless of whether you consider that right of way within the delineation or not. And I think that would be hard for people to know whether their house, they might know if their house is contributing or non-contributing because the color says so, but they will not be able to see the map and say, oh, this side of it, this is not a historic district.
It
so I
just
don't
wasn't
have to
clear
worry
in the
about it."
verbiage that was used before,
Yeah.
and so we had a large debate on like,
Yeah,
and it was like, kinda had our hands tied on it, because it was like, the
Yeah.
verbiage said, yeah, you could use vinyl siding on the back of a garage of a historic structure that is not right in front of the street, so I think if we could clarify a little bit better so we know, and so residents and patrons that come in and know.
Well, I think we would say that if it's visible from a public right of way, it needs to be adhered to the guidelines. If you want to make that a different interpretation, we can certainly incorporate that. So that's kind of something that you would decide.
Okay, well, let us
yeah.
think about that one, because that's a big one.
And we have, when you look more, because this chart in gray appears in most of the sections, changed depending on what elements you're discussing, whether it's windows or roofs or facade versus other walls. But each section then will take and be more specific about, let's talk about option 3, side elevation features and elements of non-contributing, visible from public right of way. So there, within the section, it will say, well, is it an existing, if you have existing vinyl siding, you go ahead and, you can replace it in kind. But if that particular one has wood siding, then most likely you should replace it in kind. Whereas if it's totally non-contributing from a public right of way, then it really doesn't matter. So there are those nuances. I guess if you want to just clarify it even more, then yeah, maybe making a decision what you want to see.
Okay. Yeah, you gotta fix that, man.
Yeah,
Get
it
down
was-
to the stitches here.
We're just bringing things up that, have flagged us before, so.
Yeah.
we talked mostly about that already.
So the map, just to clarify, the map, and I forget if we sent with the draft, if we sent the map separately. We probably did not, right?
No,
So the map in the document is an 8.5 by 11, just like the rest of it, with the back having all the lists of properties. But you probably also have it by itself, just so that you can see it better. So then it's like an 11 by 17. So you can decide whether, vertically or horizontally, and, what kind of legend or additional information you might want to have. And again, I guess, similarly, I don't know if you'd want all the listings on the back, the addresses
Mhm.
and stuff on the back, or, you know, I think it'd be hard to fit it within the front, so it'd have to be on the back.
Yeah, I think the address list on the back with that would be helpful
Yeah.
as a standalone.
Mm-hmm.
So who's gonna verify the addresses that it's conforming and non-conforming? Is that your responsibility to, or is it who's gonna provide that oversight?
Whose job is it?
Well, I think the whole approach here was to work with, your existing information, you know, with your existing document, your existing map, to go through it all. Certainly something we can do, but I'm not sure we had intended to sort of qualify projects. Now, maybe it's not that big a job.
No, I don't think it's I don't think we should. I think we did based primarily on what we had before and looking at the, kind of the zoning map and all that stuff, what's new, what's old, and so we tried our best. I did hear from MHT that they said, well, there could be some in there that weren't contributing, that are no longer contributing. So I feel like they would be able to have a little bit of oversight or give help on some of it if you needed it. So I don't, you know, that's certainly, you know, here we have this is sort of progress of where it is at it, but maybe they're able to do something more, because they run workshops and other things that they could, you know, help with.
I just wanna make sure it's right.
Yeah.
There's also the Maryland Association of Historic Districts,
Mm-hmm.
MAHD,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you're familiar with them. I mean, it's a good group of people to know. And it's all about architectural historians. You know, we are architects with architectural history knowledge, but the historians are the ones who sort of qualify the buildings in a more granularly, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I do think that part of your comment is there a way for us to just, you know, get rid of the obvious? I think somebody's gotta kind of go through and just make sure we don't include
Mhm.
some of the obvious ones that are non-contributing as contributing.
Mm-hmm.
And so are you saying that as a commission and as
Well, I think it's, if we start doing the photograph
For sure.
of each of the buildings,
Mhm.
and we associate to each one, we could all sit down with the group and say, obviously that's not contributing, to
Mhm.
change it to not contributing.
Yep.
So after we get some photographic exposure of each of the buildings, we can sit down as a group and go over it. And we can all look at the listings as well in the meantime and say, well, obviously it's not right. Cause I started taking a pass at it, and that's when I noticed a couple of them, so.
Yep, we will, we'll work on the photographs, hopefully when it's not 105, but.
Yeah.
Next comment is about gutters. If we're gonna introduce different types of gutters, should we be more exhaustive as we are here with roofing and other sections, including Yankee gutters and box gutters, along with various materials?
Yeah, so I was just reading through it, and you know, with roofing and some other sections, it goes really in depth into the materials, the sizing, the scaling, things like that, and then you know, we just kind of throw gutters in there as, you know, K-style and square or the half round. So there's just kind of directing people there with not necessarily giving them the whole slate of things. I don't even know if those gutters would be accurate in this area, but just some food for thought, essentially.
An actual, maybe a profile picture of each of the styles too would be helpful, so that residents who have an architectural background would know what a K-style gutter is.
Yeah, I think, you made a good point, but it could be that maybe you don't have a lot of examples in the district. And, so I do think if anyone wants to add a specific style or a particular, I mean, even if it's a door or a window that you see more of that these have not captured, let us know so that we can incorporate it.
Same as before.
Yeah, the picture you have right there is not wood siding, it's fiber cement. You reference it as an example of wood siding, and it's fiber cement.
Okay.
So that's change the picture to some other precedent.
Can we explain why each of these pictures are recommended and not recommended?
Mhm.
Next one is the rain chain actually appropriate material for the district? If not, why showcase one?
I think you had some, I think I noticed some, when we took pictures, you have it in quite a few areas. How do you guys feel about that?
I've done them on projects in the past and people hate them.
You what?
They hate them. The rain chains,
They're not sufficient
they're
drainage.
not sufficient drainage and they puddle and pond and they look nice when it's a gentle little rain, but if you get a substantial rain with a rain chain, it doesn't handle the load or the volume. So it's like, it's a good idea, but it's not probably, as a decorative feature, yes. As a practical use, I don't think it's practical.
Right, I mean, you'd essentially need to do some sort of French drain to make sure you're not
Yeah.
damaging the foundation at that point.
You see them as images a lot tied in with like a rain garden or something, so I don't know if, oftentimes in the sustainability section you have them, so I don't know.
So like with sustainability, what about,
Yeah,
what if somebody came down and wanted to do a rain barrel?
right.
And they wanted to put a rain barrel on the outside, is that something that the historic district, it would be prevalent to the right of way? I'm sure it is, as sustainability, people are gonna be asking this sort of thing, so maybe we should have something of that whole discussion, like rain chains, rain barrels, other devices that could capture rainwater or whatever. I think it'd be appropriate.
Mount Rainier, I think, was running a program, cause I think there's like different groups that, where residents were basically getting the rain barrels for free and
Yeah.
having them installed
Yeah.
and being part of a larger, sustainability. So, yeah, that's a good, and then I think there's some that work better than others, and so they were actually being very specific, well, we're gonna give you credits, but you have to use these types of barrels and
Yeah,
connect them
diverters.
this way and have them at this height to really function properly, so, yeah, it's a discussion.
Yeah, I think the county actually did a program over the winter with delivery in the spring maybe of rain barrels. So that might be a place to start in this area.
Were they offering them to the?
Yeah, at a discount,
At a discount, yeah.
not a, tax funded per se, but discounted.
Were they plastic, were they,
I think so.
so?
Kind of beige looking, and I had one.
What? I was waiting to hear your comment.
You can, the old whiskey barrels, you see those out there.
Mhm.
They're more authentic, I suppose, but you don't want them down Main Street.
Right. Yeah, I think there's an aesthetic thing that would
Yeah.
have to be considered, I would imagine.
So maybe in the rear yard or the garden, maybe.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yes.
Having grown up in another era, in another location, the way we use rain barrels in West Virginia, they were old cider barrels, number one. But number two, the water that was collected was our water that we used for inside the house for cooking
Yeah.
and even drinking.
Yeah,
I don't think that would pass today.
Especially with asphalt shingles on the roof.
We're working on a historic house in Ellicott City, it's called McAlpine, and it was built in 1858. And we were down in the basement of the crawl space area, and there's a hatch on the floor, and the owner had never opened the hatch up. So I said, well, what's in here? So we popped the hatch open, and it was this huge cistern. It had to be like a 12-foot ball down under the house, where all the downspouts connected to the cistern, and they collected all the water in the cistern, and then they pumped it out and used it for their everyday
In the
needs.
garden.
Yeah, and nobody knew it was there.
Yeah.
The center picture is a non-contributing building.
Hmm. Because it's
New construction.
New,
newer,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah, this one.
See, not too bad.
Next time you'll have to start at the back and work to the front.
So the,
Awnings.
move the,
Move the section to before the decks and porches section. So,
awnings and, what was it, awnings and,
so move the awnings with the doors, windows, and storefronts.
well, can we look at it, are you able to go to the outline to see, so that we can kind of,
Am I scrolling too far? No.
oh, you don't have, do you
Yeah,
not have
table
it?
of contents?
Yeah,
Thought I
I think I
did.
saw it earlier.
Wonder if it's not in the PDF one. Okay, we'll just do that. We are on, what page are we on? 44.
46, yeah.
There it is.
Okay.
It just did not load in the PDF one, I think.
Okay, so, section 4 is porches and deck. Section 3 is doors, windows, storefronts. 4 is porches and decks, and 5 is awnings, lighting, and signs. So you're thinking the awnings is together incorporated in section 3 with doors, windows, and storefronts?
Yeah, awnings, lighting, and signs tends to be more for our commercial businesses. So it would go, if, in my head, I think this was my comment, to be honest. In my head, it would make more sense with the storefront section to have awning, lighting, and signs.
Okay,
At least after that.
at least after, yeah, we can swap,
Yeah,
I
just
think
swap.
combining them would be tough, but
Mhm.
we can swap them and have porches and decks follow.
Yeah, that way it's not storefront and then
Yeah.
porches and decks and then, oh, we're back to storefront with awnings and signs.
Okay, yeah. So I think you were on page 47, maybe?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Maybe not.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a contentious item that we always talk about is, the businesses down here are all using Christmas lights in their storefronts. And so when it comes to lighting, we need to be very concise and definitive what can and can't be used in the storefronts, because I think we're not enforcing things. And like, okay, Christmas time comes, people put up Christmas lights, and they say, oh, these look nice, and leave them up the rest of the year. And do we
Well,
want that?
there's another issue too, and that is the use of fluorescent
Yeah.
And people, there's a couple different businesses that just adapted lighting using fluorescent as a decorative lighting, almost like Christmas lights. And but they're permanently a part of their lighting. But we don't have a distinction about, or maybe we do, I don't know.
And then all the lights are different kelvins, different colors, different, and it's like, you go down and you're like, there's bright white and, amber lights, and then you're like, it just looks hodgepodgey. So I don't know how we address that, if we add it to a guideline as like, certain things are approved, or we're just gonna say no Christmas lights, or, the whole intent was that the storefront was supposed to be illuminated with the interior light as, your primary light for a business, but people wanna add that special little eye-catcher thing.
Inside?
Yeah, they wrap them around the
the
storefront,
window.
windows,
Inside,
Do they put them outside too, or is that?
sometimes.
or wrap them around like a fake tree and put them in the window, and so.
My kids have them in their dorm rooms too,
Yeah.
so they're everywhere.
So they're all LED now, for the most part, I think.
Yeah.
And they can be really bright, or they can be
Yeah.
warmer.
I should probably know the answer to this, but were you also talking neon signs or
Yeah.
neon?
Yeah, well, that is another issue.
So they're per the current guidelines, they're not
Yeah.
approved, right? Okay.
Yeah, but they sneak in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to have, and then the council or somebody needs to back up the violations, right? So if we're gonna initiate no Christmas lights, then somebody needs to go business to business saying, listen, we've instituted no Christmas lights in storefronts, you need to remove them within 30 days or something.
Yeah.
And if we are going to enforce it or, make a definitive statement about that for like commercial use, we have to identify and send out a message to all the businesses in the towns and say, this is going forward, what we're going to look at and enforce. Otherwise, the shop owner says, well, this is the inside of my house, it's not an addition
Right.
or a renewal of anything, and I'm gonna decorate, and then you're stuck with that decision unless you have a clear guideline and you have an intention to back it up.
And I don't think we want to make it so that people can't decorate for Christmas or something of that nature, but I think
Right.
we have to make sure that we have some sort of guidelines,
Right.
what we wanna see and what we don't wanna see.
Does the
And if
town
we-
do seasonal decorations?
They do.
Do you put them on the buildings, or are they all just on the
Lamppost and
poles and?
It's a little bit of both. I think stuff goes up on town and buildings, for sure, this building, and then, lampposts, things of that nature. I don't think we put stuff up on individually on commercial buildings.
We put live greenery, like roping along the individual commercial businesses.
Some of the private
Mhm.
businesses, yeah. Ellicott City has I don't know if you've been down there, but there was a period after the flooding where they wanted to, brighten up the downtown. It was pretty dismal there for a while, and so they put lights on all the buildings up and down the street just to brighten them all up, so it was a huge undertaking. So if the town, you don't do that here, so you depend on the business owners to do their lighting. We could put a time limit on it,
Yeah.
suggested, November 1st to.
that, and maybe if we want to allow certain products to be used, we tell them what Kelvin, what size, what illumination, time it can be used. I think we just need to have some sort of guideline, something.
So we have talked about the Calvins, the warmth, the cool, what they do to the materials and why not to use them. They're obviously only in reference to the exterior, not
Yeah.
any of the interior
Yeah.
display. So I think, certainly that can be incorporated, talking about the interior display, how that's very much still part of the overall streetscape. not
You know, Breast Cancer
everything.
Awareness Month, they'll put pink
Yeah,
Christmas lights up inside, and you're like, okay, I get it, you know, it's for a month, whatever.
and the problem with the LEDs is that they're very, my kids are the same, and my house looks horrible from the outside in their rooms, it's horrendous, and I don't think there's people who don't really understand the effect that it's having on the overall, and so, but I think to say no to LEDs is a problem because, you know, from a energy efficiency standpoint, so it
Even
really,
availability, I don't think,
yeah.
you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, they're all LED lights.
Well, I just think you talk about the illumination of the storefront windows, and you talk about maybe primary lighting as the main source of light, and that secondary lighting or any sort of light or arbitrary lighting that's added to the storefronts,
Decorative, yeah.
decorative lighting, is
Yeah.
not permitted unless it's approved by the historic district
Yeah.
or something of that nature, right? So,
Okay. Somebody had mentioned illuminated signs, was that built in here at all? So
That's
it's under signage, I think.
it's outside, so
Yeah.
they're.
No internally illuminated
Right.
signs.
Yeah. Okay.
Another thing that we haven't really been enforcing so much is the display window and entry signs here. So they do the temporary painting for like Breast Cancer Awareness Month or Pride Month. That's actually something that you all do have purview over. It's just you haven't been, I guess.
No one's come to us.
No one's come to us, but we brought it up before if you even want to. Do you want to continue doing temporary, obviously the peel and stick stuff that's there, like the acupuncturist, it's there permanently. That's come to you before, but the paint on stuff, is that something you would still want to continue? Or actually start to enforce? And have come to you potentially every month for all the businesses?
I guess, what's the council think about that? I mean, because anybody could then just come and put whatever on their windows.
Yeah, I think a lot, generally like for Pride Month, because that was the most recent one where a lot of the windows were painted. I think that was done through the DSC, the Downtown Sykesville Connection, so the not-for-profit wing, I think, spearheaded most of that. So I'm not sure if they reached out to the mayor, to town council for approval to that. I never heard anything from a staff perspective. Now, the town manager may have, I don't know.
It didn't come before council at a meeting, I can say that, so I don't know if it did.
And nothing has ever come to us.
Nothing for the painting, like the temporary painting, no.
Well, yeah, and the issue, as I understand it historically here,
Mhm.
is that there is only a percentage of window that you can
Yes,
block. And, then you have these situations where you have what I might call over exuberance, and the entire window is blocked. And you say, well, now, who approved that? I don't.
yeah, it looks like, for your permanent signs, it's 15% of the total glass area, temporary signs, you're currently at 10%.
Yeah, and that gets violated
Right,
often.
So if I'm understanding, it sounds like the guidelines are here, it's just the enforcement piece doesn't seem to, because.
On,
Right.
in some occasions, and on some issues, yes.
the permanent ones have come before the commission before. So the ones where it's this shop just moved in and they wanna put up, the shop on Main or whatever on their window, that's come before. But it seems like every month there's the new painting, and that has not come before the commission, and we've talked about it before, and there was never a clear consensus on if you wanted to or did not want to see it in front of you.
And this also includes, sandwich board type signage, any signage at
That's
all.
mentioned.
No, that's further on, this is just like
Window?
applied to the window.
Okay,
or painted on the
Okay.
window.
Yeah, sandwich boards is another issue.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds like we need like a time frame or duration of when those temporary signs are allowed per the council. Like, so if it's Pride Month or whatever, 30 days from the inception of putting it on the glass to, but I don't know if it's to our privy or not. I mean, it's just a temporary.
Right.
That's the thing. If it's temporary and it's removed within a certain duration,
Mhm.
we're fine with it probably because it's just temporary. It can be removed. The problem is if so, like, let's say the historic district, somebody puts up a sign for Pride Month that's approved by the council. What if somebody 2 doors down says, well, I'm gonna paint my own window every month to put my own sign up in there, and then they'll take it down every month and put a new sign up. So then you get into that, like, who has authority over that then?
Yeah, I think Richard made a good point too, though, about the sizing of it and, you know, having some sort of control over that, because it is in the guidelines, but then if somebody does go, you know, over and above,
Should we say something in here, like temporary signage referred to the town for additional information?
Yeah, I mean, we could easily do it on a staff level, so that way you don't have 30 applications every month for it.
And
Just
I
be
would think
like,
then, if you have a question, you can
Mhm.
come to us and ask us, hey, somebody wants to do a sign that's this size.
for sure.
But if it's simple stuff like, hey, I just wanna put I'm moving in for the month and I wanna put a brand new sign up,
Yeah,
you could
like
say.
coming soon.
But I think in our guidelines, if we have something about the temporary, to refer to the town for that, that'd be nice.
Mhm.
And then we can clarify with like the DSC.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know, how long do you plan on having these up, when are they gonna be taken down, when, you know.
Yeah,
And maybe
time
it's
frames and-
something, because obviously this isn't going to be about the content that's put on it. So maybe it's something, oh yeah, it's Pride Month. There will be paintings on the windows that won't take up more than 10% of the area
yeah.
of each window.
And like the quantity, the amount, like in some, and that, it's hard because I don't know that it's necessarily in the historic district guidelines, but more general, zoning, which is you're only allowed to have 5 signs of this size on
Yeah.
this facade, or, you know,
Per year or something.
yeah.
And
so-
Kevin, we have something like that, don't
We
we?
did just adopt a new sign ordinance,
Okay.
which I don't know, you know, very.
By heart.
By heart, exactly, since it is brand new, but it's something that maybe we could just look to that, for guidance.
What I think it is that we want some sort of control, the town does, so that everybody just doesn't go haywire and adding whatever they feel like adding. So if it's the council, if it's the town, if it's us to review, somebody needs to look at it.
Yeah, so I think it's fair, maybe just put something in there about refer to staff, and then if staff is unclear or has questions, or, you know, that we can bring it before this body for additional approval
Yep.
if we feel like it needs that.
I think that's good. And they will never bring it to us.
We'll do our best. So for alternate materials, it mentions it for non-contributing structures. What about contributing buildings?
What do you wanna say?
Well, contributing would be replace in kind, so it wouldn't necessarily be alternate materials, right? If you.
Unless you wanna go in that.
Right.
So for instance, the creamery down here, when that's a contributing building years ago before any of you guys won it. No, you weren't on it either.
Yeah.
So they came to us and said, a person bought the building and said, listen, we wanna renovate the building. It had German lap siding on the side of it, it was deteriorating, and the council said, you need to replace it with the same in kind. And he's like, I can't find that material anywhere. He's like, you know how much it's gonna cost me? He said, I'm gonna put hardy siding up. And we're like, well, you know, he's like, I'm gonna put $300,000-$400,000 into this building. And they're like, well, you need to put the same sort of siding up. He's like, forget it, sold the building. Like, and what do they have up there now? Somebody bought it and put hardy siding up. So I think that's what we're talking about is alternative materials for, so if somebody comes and says, I can't find German lap siding, or can't have it milled, or can't afford to have that milled. What is our stance on that?
Well, locally, you can do what you want. If they wanna go for the other tax credits,
Sure.
they're.
But that's something that comes up all the time.
Yeah. The idea behind the tax credits is that a commercial structure on Main Street, you get 60% back, which would cut the cost of replacement kind in half and make it competitive with what you might do otherwise, so.
But like Brian, his house up there, right? He has wood siding on it.
Wood, vinyl, aluminum, I got it
So
all.
if he came back and said, look, you know, it's gonna be, I don't know, X amount of dollars to replace all my German lap siding with milled siding from Wilson's or something, which is super expensive, it's gonna be astronomical price. And he's gonna say, it's gonna deteriorate then, cause I'm not gonna replace it. Is there an alternative material then that he could use to say, well, I can't afford this, or I don't want to replace it with this, could we use a profile, like Richard used siding on your garage that was historically correct,
Correct.
that was hardy.
Yeah.
But there's other materials that match profiles and stuff, and that's what I'm talking about with alternative materials.
Yeah. So hardy would be the material of choice, that
Sure.
tends to be the next one down the ladder, you know? Because it still acts like wood, except at the corners, you can't get mitered corners. Which, you know, all these details make a building look like it did.
Unless, of course, you decide to miter them,
The hardy, you mitered hardy?
the corners.
And
We did that. It's a lot more expensive than just doing the replace in kind. Trust me on that.
So,
But, sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
well, you could do, instead of doing the 3.5 inch corner board, you can do 1.5 inches. You could do something smaller, so it's not as obvious. I mean, there would be ways to.
What I'm saying is there needs to be a path for residents, or, I'm not talking commercial buildings, but I'm talking more residential buildings, houses and stuff, because people are gonna come to us and say, you know, they have wood siding that's been painted 1,000 times and they want to replace it, and we're gonna say, okay, replace it with milled siding, and it's gonna be 10 times as much as what it was.
So it'd be good to look back at, the section on walls, because there is language in there for contributing buildings where you can't find the material, it's prohibitively expensive. It does say there that I believe it does say that the commission will consider.
Okay.
on a
That's always the
case.
fallback, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just more not making it their first option, it's sort of saying, look.
It's just
replacing
getting harder and
kind
harder
then-
to
But see, having
Confusing.
having just gone through this, and I can get off windows for just a minute, just talk, or siding and talk about windows. I mean, it's the same thing. So, I was fortunate, and the committee is great, of course, for considering alternative supplies, but as a homeowner, you have to spend a lot of your time going out figuring, the cost benefit associated with all of these other options, only to present them to find out that the current guidelines are just a bit vague. So maybe I could spend 6 weeks doing all this research into, I don't know, cementatious products or some kind of wood composite for windows, only to get here and find out, we're not really sure. So for me, I would love for us to lean in a little bit and say, hey, here are the things, if in-kind is not available, or perhaps even cost prohibitive, here are some other options that may be available to you. Because, let's face it, Hardy's been approved in a lot of places, other than, wood windows have been approved in other places. So there is precedence that exists, and I think part of what I'm hearing is, can we make it a little bit easier on the person that's going into the guidelines to say, oh, okay, here are the things that I could take a look at.
Okay.
And in reality, right, as time goes on, how many vendors now are gonna be producing siding that matches in wood, right? It's gonna get harder and harder to find that product. Craftsmen are far and few now, right, finding these guys, and cost, so I'm thinking, it's gonna become more and more prevalent that people are gonna say, I can't mess with this siding anymore, I'm gonna use hardy siding, or I'm gonna cover it with something. And that's a sad truth, that's what's coming down the pipeline. Far and few are you gonna have people that say, I'm gonna take the time, like a Fred Gossage, and replace all the commercial siding down here with wood siding. He knows somebody somewhere in Amish country, Pennsylvania, that does it or something. But it is a reality.
Well, I guess, in terms of, these are the historic preservation guidelines, and once that fabric is lost, hardly anyone would go back to installing a new material, an original siding, or find that craftsmanship. So I don't know in terms of, like, if MHT would review it and they have their comments, they would highly not recommend for contributing buildings, having that option to say, if you don't, you can choose an alternate material. That is not currently how they go about it. And I think when the district went in, I don't know how long ago it was, where this is the historic district, these are the contributing and non-contributing, once you start to lose a lot of those contributing buildings because they lose the exterior value then they're no longer part of from an MHT or
I guess it's a
national
broader
register.
picture.
Yeah, so I understand that it's vague, but I think there has to be a way to, number one, do what's best, and two, see what the second step might be if you don't.
And, so let's say somebody like Mike who's recently bought a house here, I think a lot of people buy a house and don't know what is entailed with buying a historic home, right? And so they buy a house, come back and they say, oh, my siding's failing, I found rot on my siding. And they come down to us and say, hey, I have siding, it's rotting, I need to replace it. Yeah, we want them to replace it with wood siding that matches whatever it is, if it's a contributing building. But realistically, somebody just bought a house for $500,000-$600,000 is not gonna have the funds probably to come back and say, I'm gonna replace all this siding with 5 times the cost of regular siding on this. So, and it's not our fault, it's not really their fault, but it has to be some sort of education that, and I don't know how we get the word out to people when they buy a historic home in here, that this is some of the pitfalls that you're gonna fall into when you buy a historic home. So, I mean, it's just a broader picture.
Yeah, and the MHT has, when they heard about this, they are willing to do workshops just to really launch the new guidelines and help.
Yeah, they wanna be a partner with you and support you.
So you would hope that the realtor, whoever sells the property, would inform their client that it is a historic district and it does have certain guidelines associated with the project or the building. That's what you would hope, but people.
And it tends to be, you're here in the room, and it's true of a lot of commissions that they're not out on the street. People come in and wanna replace windows, and, in Baltimore County, many times we said, well, we gotta see the windows, so we set up a technical subcommittee to go out to the sites and look at the windows, and generally most of them, 70% of them were in pretty good shape. They just needed to be scraped and reputted and painted, and there were some that were really rotted through, but you can, repair those in certain ways too, so and it's, in the end, it's not as expensive as replacing all the windows. So a lot of times you do save money by not.
Do we have something in the guidelines when it comes to windows about exterior storm windows, insulated units for that? As a approved means for thermal insulation? Right, so that would help.
And as a thought on the storm windows, do we have anything in there about the interior storms that are available now?
The Indo,
Yeah.
I believe we do.
I didn't-
I haven't looked at the document in a while to see. I'll take another look.
Because
I think
that's
we
another
did.
option
I think
for,
we did, yeah,
you know, getting that insulation without visibility.
yeah. And I mean, I think along, like, with windows, you know, sometimes, a lot of times, I mean, the cheaper vinyl windows, I mean, they're only lasting less 5 to 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
So, yeah, they're gonna pay a lot less
Mhm.
at the beginning, but if they're gonna have to replace them in 10 years, then it just, restoring the old ones, if they are, restorable, would make more sense.
So it sounds a little bit, just if I can elaborate, that you're trying to help us not get on a slippery slope and allow way to lead onto way, and for us to find ourselves in a position where there is no historical contributing structures anymore. Is that kind of a fair assessment of what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
so-
unless you wanted to separate and sort of say, okay, non-contributing, we're not as worried
So-
about.
So
versus-
fair enough, and I appreciate that. I think what I'll just reflect from my perspective is that in the guidelines today, we are at least saying that there are steps along the way for full replacements, right? So the first step is to do a repair, right? To maintain it. So that's
Yeah.
pretty straightforward. So when I have to go and evaluate whether or not I'm in a repair mode or a replace mode, who do I go to? Do you guys know who I go to? And
We do,
it's
we have a list
Why?
of historic trains that are available, yeah.
okay, but from an approval standpoint, there's no one that we have as part of the town here that's going to come to my house and tell me whether or not I'm in a replace or I'm in a maintenance or a repair. So
Well, we've defined it as the 20% or less. So that's kind of what overall these,
So I guess my comment for the committee is that, I mean, at some point, is that something that we should think about perhaps? Because I know that I ran into that when I was doing work, that there was a question about where am I in the replace or maintain? And really what it comes down to is it's your best judgment, right? And I'm not so sure that that's, you know, I don't know where the committee wants to be on that
It's a slippery
continuum.
slope.
Yeah.
So you could request an analysis of the windows that the homeowner could either go to, there's a company on Silver Spring, Moser Works, and there's one in Baltimore City, C&H Restorations, that would come out and look at the window and, you know, take it all and poke the wood and see what's rotted and what's not rotted and what shape they're in and how easy it is to fix and repair. And they would give you an analysis of the windows. So if somebody said, I need to replace all my windows, you say, well, prove to us that you need to, and, you know, hire a consultant to give us a window by window description. So, I mean, that's what MHD would expect.
for a contributing building,
Right.
certainly. And I
we've
mean,
done that, like
again,
the fire
this-
station with the
yeah.
metal windows. Remember upstairs when they came to us?
Metal window, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've,
And they bailed on that one.
they did bail, never came back.
So the way your guidelines were written were very much about this in-between, repair, replace, maintain. So that's not how typically other guidelines are written. So they might strictly be more, you know, here's doors, here's roofs, this is the material approved, this is not, you know, it's very kind of cut and dry. So I think with our input into it was to go in and say, okay, how do you separate and clarify so that there isn't, and so each of the sections, whether it's a roof or a wall window, it goes by, okay, step one, the preferred is the maintain or repair, or if you're only doing a very small amount of improvement within something. Because that's how both MHT and the National Trust consider it, sort of like the step one, the minimal, least invasive kind of thing. And then you go into, no, I have to really replace the whole wall, replace, a bunch of things. So now you're talking about more work, more money, more tax credits available, so it goes into that. Or I don't have any record of what it was, or it's totally in ruins and I really need to replace it. So it's sort of taking what you had and really separating it and making it more consistent. But otherwise it would have to be completely rewritten in terms of not having those sort of nuances.
So take off your siding and put the wood back
Well, just trying to explain it.
on. Want me to use the gavel now or later?
On my head.
Yeah, I mean, every commission struggles with this, you're not alone, I mean, they're all trying to deal with this and.
Well, and I guess, again, it's looking at my own experience, it just seems as though that if we're going to get to a place where, hey, the homeowner is in a replacement mode, can we lessen the load on the commission as well as the homeowner by having some things that are readily available for them to go, oh yeah, I could do this, or this. I think that's where I would be coming from with some of this. I mean, if you have to, if you can't replace in kind, then this is what your options are. But that's if you follow those other steps, right? I can do a repair, I can maintain. Once I get to that point, it would really be nice to be able to not, because I have come in front of the commission and I've carried material with me. I have said that, hey, here's what's available in the market. The commission has said, hey, we'll do our own research. I mean, it's a level of effort that, my thinking is that a new set of guidelines might help with some of that efficiency. And I'll yield the floor.
Yeah, we're not gonna solve it tonight.
Yeah.
Again, that's where maybe having some strictly, this is off the table at least, lessen, like you said, just lessen the burden. Even if we can't say these are the things that you can use. I know like Windows, it says no vinyl for contributing, things like that. But if maybe there's a more expansive list of things that we know we wouldn't go for, proscribe more.
Well, it's always case by case basis, so it's, you don't set precedent, you take each one on its own, so.
Okay, let's try to roll through.
Would aluminum siding also not be acceptable as an alternate material?
What was that?
Well, I guess we haven't specified that aluminum siding is not acceptable, but you have it currently in some buildings. Now, the situation might be that someone just needs to repair, or needs to do something, and it makes sense to use that same material to continue. So, saying that it's not acceptable would.
That's repair in kind, right? That would be.
Right.
Right, so if it's replacement, could you replace with aluminum or,
Well, if it's.
if it's not,
If it's already
because this
there,
is
you can't,
non-contributing, right?
If you're taking it all off, you can't change material unless you're going back to the original, typically.
Okay. So it'd be allowed for repair or replacing aluminum, but not like replacing hardy with aluminum, not that anyone would do that, but.
That would be preferable, I think.
Right, okay.
that's it, it's the ladder, you know, where are you on the ladder? If you're wood siding, you're up here, you can't go down to aluminum. You know, if you're aluminum, you could go up to wood.
Right.
Or
Can't go down to vinyl.
Can't go
Yeah.
down to vinyl, right?
Okay, just trying to understand the ladder.
There should be some consideration on the appropriateness of insulation. Older buildings are built to breathe, and over-insulating without baffles can cause rot and deterioration. Simply encouraging insulation is not the most preservation-minded approach.
Yeah, and I think you all have been talking a lot of MHT. If we just wrote, say, insulation, obviously this says rock wool, but you know, if somebody goes and gets the idea to spray foam in there, you can't undo that. You can undo, you know, fiberglass or what have you, but you know, I think if we're going to go down that road of encourage things like that, a little more guidance for people would be, you know, probably a good idea.
A little education there too.
I think we discussed it in the, I feel like it's somewhere else where the insulation is discussed, but maybe we either take it out from there and bring it here, or reference the two so they, yeah.
Yeah, because the last thing we want to do is somebody makes their home more energy efficient, but then, you know, their sheathing or their studs or whatever ends up rotting in the process.
No guidance on EV charging stations, but it would seem these should be hidden from view when possible to maintain historic appearances.
Pretty self-explanatory.
So will there be a time where you'll have charging stations on Main Street? Like parking meters?
Potentially, it's tough to say. I mean, we have the two, you know, that one that's pictured is right out here next to this building. In terms of, you know, right out on Main Street, I highly doubt it. You know,
10 years from now.
Yeah, never say never, but I would think if they were to go anywhere in town, it would be in, you know, some of the parking lots, which some of those are still viewable from public right away. So I guess just depending on how we would want to approach that when it inevitably becomes a reality of, you know, more of these things popping up. So like I said, right on Main Street.
We can just require that they be put in the ground.
Yeah.
Big outlet.
Exactly.
Generators should be added to the equipment section. Would we also consider other measures that camouflage condensate lines? An example being a dummy downspout containing lines and not painted the color of the building.
Yeah, I think there's just, you know, again, there's just other methods out there beyond just painting
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
conduit.
I think a similar kind of an issue comes up with, we're joking about the charging stations, but there's going to be an increased pressure to figure out how you're going to do solar. And I know that the recommendation here is that if you're going to put install solar on a roof, it has to be not visible to Main Street. Well, solar is dependent upon relationships with the sun, so that could raise some interesting issues for the future too. I don't.
Cross that road when it comes.
Climate change is real.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, it's good, sorry.
Baltimore County, there's one project in particular where improved solar was in Relay down by the B&O Railroad, by the old B&O. And it was on a non-contributing house, and we said, sure. Well, they filled the roof with with solar panels. It's the first house you see as you're driving into the historic district. It looks terrible.
Yeah.
They-
No,
'cause they're not skilled at making them look good or making them symmetrical or design them properly. And then all the, the feeds come off the roof and they run down the walls and just,
Yeah.
so that was a big mistake.
Yeah.
So I think with the public good has been damaged by the owner's benefit. It's kind of so do you try to at least say hide them from view, and then you can deal with it case by case if they need more. They always want more, they always want to put more on. And sort of leave it, just draw that line at least, and then if people need more, they can come to you for approval. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's more, if it's more, I think it's important to consider the main street, the integrity of, as you go down the street, what happens, whether that's community solar, gets put elsewhere, it really, there has to be a discussion about how it impacts sort of that visual quality as you're going down, because even with contributing versus non-contributing, the moment that you have a row of 3 that are really strong in terms of their materials and their quality, and then you're sort of allowing something different to happen, you start to have these missing pockets of continuity, which really just takes away completely from that beautiful main street.
I guess all I was saying was we're gonna have to be innovative in that area as well. Find solutions that don't appear.
I mean, there's emerging technology where they have films that can be applied that are transparent to windows, that are solar panels, that's coming.
Shingles.
The shingles, I mean, it's emerging technology that's not really out there yet, so.
Yeah.
The one comment just said, discuss driveways.
Yeah, I found it interesting that you guys said that gravel driveway should stay in place. Because how many people come and say they wanna put blacktop driveways in there? And we've approved blacktop driveways before. And the guidelines, what they're suggesting here is that the intent is to stay gravel. And we never discussed it, so I just put that in there just because it's aha, like, oh, wow. So, Matt, his house there was approved for a driveway up there, and that was gravel one time. So according to the guidelines, we should have left it as gravel.
As soon as it got paved, I think, too. They had a sewer line break or something.
So, just something to consider. And I understand it, heat on effect and all that stuff, it's just makes houses hotter and blah, 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 but I have a gravel driveway, so do you, don't you?
I have a gravel. You have a gravel. I convinced Ed to keep it gravel.
I need to come in front of the committee.
Soon. After you take off your siding.
Yeah, I guess it'll be a while.
Entries in district gateway, should this be in the guidelines?
Did I put that?
Yes, I think so.
Trees in district gateway. Oh, yes. So, you're talking about the entranceway, you're talking about like ideas and stuff that maybe should be done in the future about the bridge coming over to Tapsco
That
River.
actually came from.
I think it should be removed. I think it's
Yeah.
subjective. I don't think we should really have anything of that nature in our guidelines about future work.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
It's like, I think if somebody's gonna propose something for the bridge or any other aspects of coming to town, it should be brought up. I don't think it should be written in our guidelines. And you guys agree?
Makes sense to me.
I mean, you can always add it later once you've
Yeah.
engaged it.
I mean, we talked about the master planning, about widening the bridge at Patapsco River and stuff, and the stuff that's mentioned in here, but that's master plan, that's not historic district guidelines written in stone stuff, so I think it should be excluded from it.
So the, in Towson, the county commission reviewed an old bridge abutment, stone bridge abutments for the mom power rail line that went through Towson. The bridge was gone, but the abutments were still there, and the developer that came in to build this apartment building wanted to rip it all out, and because it was in the historic district, the landmark said you can't do it, so he had to incorporate it, that was into the building. So that would be something, a vestige of the past, it's still there, do you?
So that makes me think about the Dickey Railroad bridge going down Spout Hill, right? So that is an entryway into the historic district.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if anybody brings it up in the council or anything, it's deteriorating. If nothing gets done to it, it's gonna fall down eventually, right? Because it's iron and it's rusting away, so.
Is it a state highway that runs through? Is it?
It's an unused bridge. I mean,
Yeah,
an old rail
it's an
trestle.
old rail line.
the rail,
Rail spur that connects
that-
the rail line here.
So who owns it?
That's an
We don't know.
excellent
That's a
question.
great question, I've been trying to figure that out. for the
no,
last
nobody
year.
will claim
Nobody will claim it.
ownership of that rail,
Yeah, we've been trying.
period.
Yeah,
But
I'm
if somebody-
actively trying to determine ownership and have been for the last year and a half. I've been talking to multiple state agencies they all point to each other. It's not clear it doesn't look like we own it. That seems to be a pretty clear consensus, but no one else is willing to.
But if CSX owns it, they need to maintain it, right?
But CSX say they don't. It seems to be.
The rail between our houses,
Yeah,
issue and point,
yeah,
nobody will claim that.
I know.
And that's, so we're working on that actively, we just don't, we're having a hard time getting anyone to.
The way I read it is zoning two is if it's not maintained within 10 years, it reverts back to the original property owner, which would mean that Richard would own half and I would own half because we back to each other to the center of the line. That's the way I read it, but no one
Who's
no
gonna,
one's-
who's
no
gonna
one
fill
will
the
acknowledge
ditch?
that.
We each get a rail.
But it's so, there's trees and stuff that fall.
I'm sure
There's
that's
erosion.
not on it too, so you may not want it, right?
Now, but the main entrance in the town is that bridge, so that's a focal point. And so,
Yeah,
do we want it to?
that's Spout
and
Hill,
it's-
that's true.
And it's part of our purview as a historic district commission, so, could we say, hey, you guys need to fix the bridge? Somebody needs to fix the bridge.
We're trying to.
We could if we knew who to say it to.
Exactly, that's right, because they'll.
Okay, so you have 30 days or we're gonna write a violation
Yeah,
letter.
the whole point of us doing this, is to figure out the road facility, the whole rail line cleaned up, the whole Dickey line cleaned up. So we're trying to figure out ownership and who's responsible for that.
Anyway, we're just talking about, entrances into the town, and that's an important factor, I think, that we should discuss in the future.
The realistic issue with the Dickey line is water runoff,
Right. Yeah.
because that really is coming off First Avenue, where's the
streets-
water go?
All Carroll Avenue, all the parallel streets all drain into the Dinky Railroad.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're trying. It's not as easy as I thought it would be when I first went down the road trying to investigate ownership of that.
Kevin thought he would make one phone call and,
Yeah.
Here we are a year and a half later, and I've
we'd already made several phone calls before you.
right back to where I started, so.
That's what's holding up the Ellicott City project, the tunnel, the stormwater tunnel they want to drill. It's gotta go under the CSX line, and it's just sat.
Yeah.
They're holding up a $100 million project because they want to approve it, so.
Frustrating.
the next one is about the diameter of trees. And then at one point in the guidelines, it said 6 inches. Here it said 16. We've actually been using 12 as our standard, 12 inches in diameter. Do we still want to keep it as 12 inches and above you have to get approval? I guess is a question for y'all.
12, 16.
Out of my
Yeah,
league.
I'm not an arborist, so.
12 it is then.
Well,
I
I
mean-
guess your, is it written in your code?
So our town standard is 12 inches.
12, okay,
Mhm.
So
okay.
for consistency's sake,
Yeah.
if we wanna keep
Yeah.
it that.
Okay. So be it.
12 it is.
too? No?
It may be worthwhile to add Preservation Maryland and the UMD program in historic preservation to the important addresses and numbers. Both can be a resource.
I think I put that in the wrong place. I was looking at the next. No, not the appendix. There was another listing of all kinds of resources somewhere. Might not have been that, but either way.
And that could just be something that we have here, not necessarily in the guidelines, but if people come and they're looking for help on their windows or something, we can point them in different directions.
You would put it on our website on this.
Mhm.
Chair,
Historic district page.
I apologize, but I have to leave.
I think that's the end of it anyways, so. Not too shabby.
Great, that's great feedback, thank you very much.
Good.
For your time and effort there. So I guess if you could send that to us.
We'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's our review.
Yeah, we'll, think about it some more and incorporate it into the document and generate another draft and take a look at it again.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Is there anything else on the agenda that we need to talk about?
The only thing I have is there's a tree, Springfield and I think it's Walnut Avenue. It is in the power lines and they need to take it down. And it is a nasty, gross looking tree.
Yeah, they were out there the other night cutting some of it off. It had actually split and fallen on the lines.
Mhm. Yeah, so staff gave them approval because it is a danger to the power lines right there, but I tell you all about those when they come up.
Okay, great.
That is all I have.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.